The classroom was silent, too silent. A faint echo of laughter faded down the hallway as the door clicked shut from the outside. Inside, Maya sat alone, trapped. They thought it was just another joke, locking the quiet black girl inside after school hours. But they didn't know who Maya really was, or what she was capable of when pushed too far. As the lights flickered and shadows crawled across the walls, the bullies' laughter from the hallway slowly turned into confusion, then fear, because something had shifted inside that room, something none of them could explain. By morning, the entire school would be talking about what Maya did next, and no one would ever call her weak again. Maya had always been quiet. Not because she lacked a voice, but because the world rarely gave her one. In the hallways of Jefferson High, whispers followed her like shadows, and laughter often echoed at her expense. She moved through the corridors with careful steps, keeping her gaze low, her presence almost invisible. Teachers noticed her but rarely intervened. Her parents worried, but could not fight the daily weight of cruelty she carried. Despite the isolation, Maya was observant. She saw patterns in behavior others dismissed as casual cruelty. She noticed how certain students clustered together, like predators moving in packs, and how the same faces reappeared whenever someone was cornered, mocked, or humiliated. Over the years, she had learned to anticipate their moves, to measure their intentions, and to calculate the small openings that might allow her to escape their traps. Yet, even the most cautious person can be caught off guard. The bullies were infamous in the school, a tight trio that seemed inseparable. Marcus, the ringleader, thrived on control. He had a way of making every word sting, every glance pierce, as though the world revolved around his amusement. Jenna, his closest ally, matched him in cruelty, but hid it behind a soft smile and polite nods to the teachers. Then there was Liam, less strategic but equally ruthless, willing to follow orders to maintain favor with the others. Together they orchestrated a reign of subtle terror, making even the bravest students flinch. It was Friday, the end of a long week that seemed heavier than most. Maya had spent the day walking the perimeter of classrooms during passing periods, avoiding confrontation while carrying her stack of textbooks like armor. She had made it through each hour without incident, though she sensed the bullies' eyes tracking her from across the hallway. Marcus had been unusually quiet, almost too quiet, and that made her uneasy. By the time the final bell rang, signaling the end of classes, Maya thought she had survived another day. But Jefferson High had other plans. The hallways emptied quickly as students fled for freedom. Only a handful remained, custodians moving slowly with their carts, teachers packing up for the weekend, and a few stragglers finishing last-minute homework. It was in this quiet, unobserved moment that the bullies made their move. They cornered her near classroom 14B, a room rarely used after school. Marcus's shadow fell across the doorway, blocking escape, while Jenna and Liam flanked her from either side. There was a brief pause, just enough for Maya to register the deliberate planning in their actions. Then, with practiced precision, Marcus pushed the door closed behind her. The lock clicked into place. The room was empty. The air smelled of chalk dust and stale paper. It was supposed to be a joke, a prank to humiliate her one more time. The three of them lingered in the hallway, laughing softly, certain they had delivered a moment of dominance that would be retold among their peers. But they didn't know that Maya had anticipated every step. She had studied the lock before, memorized its mechanism from previous accidental confinements, and had already begun considering the possibilities once inside. The classroom was dimly lit by the fading afternoon sun, slanting through the tall windows and casting long shadows across the floor. Maya's heart beat steadily, not in panic but in preparation. The usual fear that accompanied confinement had been replaced by clarity. She had no intention of being just another story, whispered and laughed about. She would rewrite the narrative, on her terms. Outside, the faint echoes of their laughter continued, but inside, Maya's mind raced with ideas. She moved to the nearest desk, lightly tapping each surface, testing the creaks and the gaps. Her fingers brushed over the edge of the lock, tracing the familiar grooves. She knew she had time, enough to turn this moment into something they would never forget. She remembered every slight, every word whispered behind her back, every cruel prank they had forced her to endure. Yet, rather than seeking revenge in the way they expected, with violence or anger, she considered the element they had overlooked: surprise. Their arrogance was palpable, their belief in their invincibility blinding them. They had underestimated the one person who had studied them as much as they had studied her. The clock ticked forward, each second stretching the tension, and Maya's resolve solidified. She envisioned the outcome as if it were already happening. The bullies would leave, thinking she was trapped, their victory complete. But the truth, cleverly hidden in the silence of the classroom, would soon reveal itself. As she moved silently across the room, she noticed small details others overlooked: the slightly loose panel under the teacher's desk, the forgotten janitor's keys tucked near the radiator, the faint reflection in the glass board that could be used to signal or misdirect. Every small observation became a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle designed to flip the power dynamic in her favor. Maya's breathing was steady. Her mind worked like a strategist, plotting each action in advance. She imagined the aftermath, the shock in the eyes of her tormentors when they discovered their control was an illusion, the whispers that would ripple across the school, the new reputation she would forge not through confrontation, but through intelligence and courage. Meanwhile, in the hallway, the bullies continued their antics. Their laughter was casual, even arrogant, as they walked toward the vending machines, confident in their dominance. None of them imagined the meticulous planning taking place just a few feet away. Every step they took, every glance they threw over their shoulders, only reinforced the pattern Maya had studied for years. In that moment, time seemed suspended. The classroom, empty and silent, became a stage. Maya was no longer a passive figure, no longer the quiet student who endured. She had transformed into a presence that commanded the room, a mind racing ahead of the predictable cruelty outside. Even as the sun dipped lower, casting the room in deeper shadow, Maya remained calm. The emotional weight of years of bullying, humiliation, and isolation fueled her creativity rather than fear. She saw the empty classroom not as a prison, but as an arena, the perfect environment to turn the tables, not with brute force, but with precision. Outside, the world carried on. Teachers locked up, students left in clusters, oblivious to the drama unfolding behind the closed door. The bullies assumed the end of the day meant the end of their encounter. They were wrong. Inside, Maya's hands moved deliberately, testing, calculating, preparing. Every small action had purpose. Every silent movement laid the groundwork for what would come next. She imagined the expressions on their faces, the disbelief that would ripple through the hallways, the quiet realization that they had misjudged her completely. This classroom, once a space of confinement and fear, would become a canvas for a story of empowerment, intelligence, and unexpected triumph. Maya knew that when the bell rang the next day, no one would remember her as the quiet girl in the corner. Instead, they would remember the day the tables turned, the day a carefully calculated, seemingly impossible act left the bullies stunned and the school buzzing with whispers of disbelief. And in that quiet, empty classroom, Maya felt a strange mix of anticipation and calm. She was ready, not with anger, not with violence, but with the cunning and clarity that comes from having endured more than anyone else could imagine. She was no longer trapped. The room was in fact a sanctuary, a place where she would prove that patience, observation, and courage could achieve what raw strength and cruelty never could. The shadows lengthened across the desks. The lock remained intact. The bullies still laughed down the hallway. But Maya's plan was already in motion, unseen, unstoppable, and unforgettable. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the narrative would have completely changed. She would no longer be a victim, merely a name whispered in the corridors. She would become the story that everyone told, the black girl who turned the empty classroom into a stage, and her tormentors into the audience of their own humiliation. The hallway outside remained deceptively quiet. The faint hum of the ventilation system, the soft scuff of distant footsteps, and the occasional slamming of a locker were the only sounds. Marcus, Jenna, and Liam had moved on, convinced that the joke was complete. They believed Maya was trapped, defeated, waiting for the moment when she would finally plead or beg for release. They could not have been more wrong. Inside the classroom, Maya's senses were alert. Every detail mattered. The flickering light above, the tiny creak in the window frame, the faint scent of chalk and dust that filled the air. These were not obstacles. They were tools, markers in a carefully mapped environment. Her eyes darted across the desks, scanning for leverage points, pathways, and objects that could aid her. The first step was subtle. Maya moved to the teacher's desk and examined the lock from a new angle, noting a slight imperfection in its mechanism. Years of observation had taught her patience, and patience was her weapon now. She pressed lightly against the door, testing the tension of the lock. It held firm, but she had anticipated this. With a gentle flick, she shifted a small piece of metal that had loosened with age. The lock gave the faintest click, imperceptible to anyone outside, but significant enough to give her confidence. Next, she turned to the environment itself. The classroom, long abandoned after hours, held forgotten objects. Loose wires dangling from a projector, a stack of unused chairs in the corner, a broken window latch that opened with minimal effort. Maya began assembling a plan that relied not on brute force, but on ingenuity. She stacked the chairs strategically, positioning them to create a barrier between herself and the door. The stack was precarious, but every piece was placed with precision. Her mind worked in tandem with her hands. She imagined the bullies' reactions before they happened, their confusion, their disbelief, their eventual fear. She knew their arrogance would be their downfall. Marcus had always been the type to underestimate, to assume that intimidation was sufficient. He had never faced someone who studied him, someone who calculated every response, every likely misstep. Outside, the faint sound of laughter resumed. Marcus and his companions returned, having decided to linger near the vending machines, ensuring that no one else saw the trap they had set. The echoes of their voices carried down the hallway, sharp and casual, masking their underlying confidence. They had no idea that Maya's silent preparations had already begun to alter the power dynamic. Maya's next move involved misdirection. She noticed the reflection of the hallway in the glass board at the front of the classroom. By angling it slightly, she could see their approach without revealing her actions. Every step they took, every gesture, was now feeding her strategy. She began to subtly manipulate the environment, moving chairs, adjusting the light, creating shadows that distorted perception. She wanted them to see a room that was empty, yet charged with unseen potential, a room where nothing was as simple as it seemed. Time stretched as Maya worked with surgical precision. Each adjustment increased the tension, like winding a spring. The air in the room felt heavier, thick with anticipation. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears, not from fear, but from the thrill of control. She was no longer a passive participant. She had become the architect of an unfolding drama that would leave no one unchanged. The bullies, meanwhile, were growing restless. Marcus, sensing a delay in his entertainment, decided to return. He strode down the hallway, Jenna and Liam trailing behind, laughing but increasingly impatient. Their confidence was palpable. They believed they had already won. But as they approached the classroom door, subtle shifts in the environment began to unsettle them. Shadows moved where there should be none. Chairs seemed oddly positioned. And the faint click of the lock, previously unnoticed, now rang in their subconscious. Maya watched from her vantage point, heart steady, eyes sharp. She initiated the next phase of her plan. Using the stack of chairs, she created a subtle obstacle that would force anyone entering to pause, to hesitate. She adjusted the reflection in the glass board so that the hallway appeared empty, masking her presence entirely. Then, with precise timing, she triggered a small chain reaction. A loose wire nudged a chair, causing a soft clatter, just enough to attract attention without revealing her position fully. The effect was immediate. Marcus froze, scanning the hallway. Jenna's eyes narrowed. Liam's confidence faltered slightly. Their collective sense of control began to crack. They assumed it was a coincidence, a minor distraction, easily ignored. But their instincts, honed by years of bullying, whispered that something was off. Inside, Maya continued to manipulate the room. She used a small reflective surface to create the illusion of movement in the shadows, suggesting that someone might be watching from an angle they couldn't see. Every detail, every adjustment, was designed to heighten uncertainty. She knew fear was psychological. It thrived on doubt, on anticipation, on the unknown. The bullies hesitated at the threshold of the classroom. Marcus stepped forward cautiously, the air in the hallway suddenly heavier, charged with tension. Maya observed silently, noting every flicker of expression. The quick glance exchanged between Marcus and Jenna, the hesitation in Liam's step. The balance of power, once overwhelmingly in their favor, had begun to shift imperceptibly. Maya's strategy reached its crescendo. She activated a subtle mechanism. A chair tipped slightly, hitting the door in a way that made it rattle, creating a loud, alarming sound. The noise echoed through the hallway, catching the attention of anyone nearby. Marcus jumped back instinctively. Jenna yelped in surprise, and Liam stumbled slightly, his confidence shattered. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by unease. It was in this moment of confusion that Maya executed the final step of her plan. She revealed herself slowly, emerging from the shadows, calm, composed, and entirely in control. Her presence alone disrupted the narrative they had written for her. The bullies had expected fear, submission, perhaps even anger. Instead, they were met with precision, intelligence, and unwavering composure. The psychological impact was immediate. Marcus's arrogance faltered, replaced by doubt. Jenna's carefully constructed confidence wavered, her composure cracking. Liam, the least calculating of the three, was frozen entirely, unable to process the sudden reversal of roles. They had underestimated her, and that miscalculation was now their undoing. Maya's mastery of the environment, her anticipation of their movements, and her calculated use of sound and reflection had turned an empty classroom into a stage of suspense and power. The bullies were trapped not by physical chains, but by their own assumptions, their own arrogance, and Maya's meticulous planning. As the tension built, the hallway outside seemed to stretch infinitely. The echoes of their earlier confidence now rang hollow, replaced by the growing realization that they had misjudged her entirely. Maya had transformed the space, manipulating every sensory input to her advantage. The climax of this rising action approached not through confrontation, but through anticipation. The bullies, sensing the shift, attempted to retreat, but every exit had been subtly controlled. Maya had guided their movements without their knowledge, steering them into uncertainty and discomfort. Their fear was not born of immediate threat, but of the unknown, of a mind that had anticipated them at every step. In those final moments before the ultimate confrontation, Maya stood at the center of the room, calm, observant, and entirely prepared. She had turned a situation designed to humiliate her into a demonstration of intellect, patience, and psychological mastery. The empty classroom, once a symbol of her isolation, had become a proving ground, a stage for the reversal of power. The bullies' footsteps faltered. Their whispers ceased. Marcus glanced around, searching for the source of the disquiet he could not explain. Jenna and Liam exchanged uncertain looks. The laughter that had once defined their dominance had vanished completely, replaced by tension, doubt, and a creeping sense of helplessness. And then, without a word, without a visible threat, Maya initiated the final element of her strategy, the one that would leave the bullies stunned and the school talking for weeks. The moment was subtle, yet undeniable. Their perception of control shattered in an instant, leaving them to confront the unexpected consequences of underestimating someone they had always dismissed. By the time anyone else arrived in the hallway, the classroom had already become a scene of suspense, anticipation, and whispered speculation. The bullies, once confident, now found themselves at the mercy of circumstances they could not control. Maya, in contrast, moved with the ease of someone who had already anticipated every possible outcome. The rising action concluded with a taut sense of expectation. The stage was set, the players positioned, and the final confrontation, when it came, would not be a matter of chance. The audience, invisible yet omnipresent, could only imagine what would unfold next, a sequence that promised shock, awe, and the complete reversal of power. The empty classroom, once a site of intimidation, had become a crucible of suspense. Every step, every subtle sound, every manipulated shadow contributed to a meticulously crafted scenario in which the bullies' assumptions were their own undoing. Maya had transformed fear into strategy, isolation into advantage, and anticipation into a weapon more potent than any act. The hallway outside had grown eerily quiet. The usual bustle of students was gone, replaced by a tense, almost imperceptible hum. Marcus, Jenna, and Liam stood frozen at the classroom door, their confidence drained, replaced by unease. They had expected fear, submission, or even anger from Maya. Instead, they found silence, calculated precision, and a presence that radiated control. Inside the room, Maya's movements were deliberate, almost imperceptible. She positioned the last chair just so, adjusted the reflection in the glass board, and ensured that the faint flicker of the overhead light played tricks with shadows along the walls. Every detail, every subtle shift was part of a carefully orchestrated sequence. She didn't need brute force. She needed mastery of perception. Marcus took the first tentative step toward the door. The lock, which had seemed innocuous moments ago, rattled faintly under a slight pressure, a subtle signal that something was different. His hand hovered above the handle, hesitant. He looked at Jenna and Liam, seeking reassurance, but their expressions mirrored his own uncertainty. The arrogance that had carried them through countless acts of cruelty was now gone, replaced by doubt. Maya watched through the reflection, her breathing calm, measured, controlled. Every instinct, every learned observation from years of being underestimated, guided her actions. She waited for the exact moment, the perfect instant when their combined confidence would tip into vulnerability. Then, she acted. A chair shifted slightly, seemingly on its own, producing a sharp, alarming noise that echoed through the hallway. Marcus jumped back instinctively, stumbling over his own feet. Jenna's breath hitched and Liam's shoulders tensed. Panic, subtle yet undeniable, began to seep into their posture. The classroom, once empty and quiet, now held an invisible force that seemed to push back against them. Maya stepped forward, her silhouette emerging from the shadows. The faint light caught her face, calm and unwavering, and the bullies froze. They had expected submission, yet here she stood, composed, prepared, and entirely untouchable. A sudden noise from the back of the room drew their attention. A stack of chairs toppled in a precise sequence, blocking the exit and forcing them to confront the reality of their situation. The shadows danced unnaturally across the walls, manipulated by Maya's careful placement of mirrors and reflective surfaces. To the bullies, the room seemed alive, as if reacting to their presence, mocking their every attempt at dominance. Marcus tried to speak, but no words came. The control he had wielded for years dissolved instantly under the weight of unpredictability. Jenna's mouth opened, closed, and opened again, yet her usual sharpness was gone. Liam shuffled his feet, looking for a way out, but the room itself seemed to deny him. Every detail, every calculated step by Maya, worked in concert to dismantle their confidence. Then came the final stroke, a subtle release of a mechanism Maya had prepared earlier. A faint but audible click echoed from the lock. The door, which had seemed immovable, now swung slightly under pressure. It was not a tool of escape, but a trap of perception. The bullies leaned forward, expecting to regain control, only to find that their assumptions had been turned against them. The psychological impact was immediate. Marcus's eyes widened as he realized that every move, every step, every slight hesitation had been anticipated. Jenna's composure shattered completely. Liam's confusion escalated into panic. The empty classroom, once a symbol of their supposed dominance, had become an arena where they were powerless. Maya moved closer, her steps deliberate, controlled, almost ceremonial. Each movement was a statement of intent. She was no longer the quiet girl in the corner. She was the orchestrator of their unraveling. The shadows played tricks on their minds. The noise from the manipulated environment amplified their fear, and the calculated positioning of objects forced them to confront their own helplessness. It was at this moment that the full magnitude of her plan revealed itself. A series of subtle but dramatic signals, the fallen chairs, the manipulated reflections, the strategic creaks and shifts, created a symphony of controlled chaos. The bullies were disoriented, their perception distorted, and their confidence shattered. Maya did not raise her voice. She did not act with aggression. She allowed the situation to unfold, each carefully prepared element doing the work of exposing their vulnerability. Outside, the faint sound of approaching footsteps hinted at the arrival of other students. The bullies' panic increased. They glanced at one another, their alliance strained under pressure. The realization hit them. They were no longer in control. The quiet girl they had tormented for years had become the dominant force in a space they thought was theirs. Then came the final, undeniable demonstration. Maya triggered the last element, a subtle shift in the room's lighting combined with a timed sound, a loud crash that echoed as if something massive had fallen. The bullies flinched, instinctively looking around for what had caused it. Their fear was complete. In that instant, their psychological armor crumbled. Maya stepped into the center of the room, calm, composed, and fully aware of the effect she had created. Her presence alone was enough to command the attention of anyone who entered. Marcus, Jenna, and Liam were now fully exposed, their arrogance, their cruelty, and their false sense of dominance laid bare in front of an invisible audience. The aftermath was immediate. The bullies scrambled to retreat, but the environment had been manipulated in such a way that every movement reinforced their helplessness. Chairs blocked paths, shadows distorted perception, and subtle reflections created the illusion of multiple presences in the room. Their panic, magnified by their own assumptions, became the climax of Maya's strategy. Maya's mind remained clear. She did not gloat, she did not celebrate. Her triumph was quiet, precise, and undeniable. The bullies had been undone not through physical confrontation, but through careful planning, intelligence, and psychological mastery. The empty classroom had become a stage for justice, crafted with patience and executed with precision. As the bell signaling the end of the school day finally rang, the hallway outside filled with curious onlookers. The bullies' retreat was noticeable, their confusion and humiliation palpable. Whispers spread quickly. Something had happened in classroom 14B, something that none of the usual narratives could explain. The quiet girl, long underestimated, had orchestrated an event that left everyone questioning the dynamics of power and control. Maya, standing amidst the meticulously arranged remnants of her strategy, felt a quiet satisfaction. She had reclaimed the narrative, asserting control without violence, without anger, and without the need for revenge. The bullies were exposed for what they were, flawed, arrogant, and entirely unprepared for someone who had observed, anticipated, and mastered the situation completely. The classroom, once a symbol of confinement, had transformed into a testament to patience, intellect, and subtle power. Every student who entered afterward would feel the echoes of what had occurred, and the reputation of Maya would shift forever. She was no longer the quiet, overlooked girl. She was the strategist, the orchestrator, the unstoppable force hidden in plain sight. By the time teachers and students fully understood what had transpired, the story had already become legend. The day the bullies were undone by their own assumptions. The day the quiet girl in classroom 14B proved that intelligence, foresight, and composure could triumph over arrogance and cruelty. The climax ended not with a scream, not with chaos, but with the stunning realization of power reversed, leaving both the bullies and the school utterly shocked. The next morning, the halls of Jefferson High buzzed with whispers, the energy charged with curiosity and disbelief. Students spoke in hushed tones, glancing toward classroom 14B, their imaginations filling in the blanks of what had happened. The rumor mill had already begun, and within hours, the story had grown in scale and intensity. The quiet, unassuming Maya had done the impossible. She had outsmarted the bullies, turned the tables, and reclaimed control over a space that had long been used to intimidate her. Maya herself walked through the halls with measured calm, every step a quiet declaration of her presence. She felt no triumph in arrogance, no desire to boast. Her satisfaction came from the knowledge that justice, subtle yet absolute, had been achieved. The events of the previous day had rewritten the narrative of her life at Jefferson High, where fear and isolation had once defined her. Respect and curiosity now replaced them. The bullies, however, faced a starkly different reality. Marcus, who had always relied on intimidation to mask insecurity, now found himself publicly exposed. His confident stride was replaced with tentative steps, each glance over his shoulder revealing lingering doubt. Jenna's carefully constructed facade of social grace had crumbled, her once commanding presence diminished by the realization that her actions, and those of her allies, had been anticipated and undone. Liam, the least calculating but no less complicit, struggled to regain composure as whispers of the incident followed him down the halls. The principal, having been alerted to the incident, entered classroom 14B with a sense of urgency. She expected chaos, confrontation, perhaps even violence. Instead, she found an impeccably arranged space, a room that bore the quiet but undeniable mark of careful strategy. Maya's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the distressed and apologetic expressions of the bullies. The principal's astonishment was immediate. The situation was unprecedented. As accounts of the incident circulated among staff and students, the psychological impact on the school culture began to unfold. Students who had previously felt powerless in the face of bullying now witnessed a clear example of intelligence and foresight, triumphing over aggression. Conversations shifted from fear to strategy, from avoidance to empowerment. Maya's actions had not only altered her own trajectory, but had also set a new precedent for the community at large. The bullies, meanwhile, faced consequences both formal and social. Marcus was called into the principal's office, where his behavior was addressed with a seriousness that could not be ignored. His previous reputation as untouchable now worked against him. Teachers and students alike observed his interactions with heightened scrutiny. Jenna and Liam, similarly, were confronted with the reality that their tactics of intimidation were no longer effective. Social dynamics shifted as peers began to distance themselves from those who had been undone so thoroughly, creating a ripple effect that would last for months. Maya, though, remained unshaken. Her focus was not on punishment but on principle. She understood the fragility of power and the value of perception. By leveraging observation, patience, and strategic planning, she had turned an oppressive situation into one of empowerment. Her victory was quiet, yet its resonance was felt throughout the school. She became a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and the subtle force that arises when one refuses to be underestimated. In the days that followed, Maya noticed subtle changes in behavior around her. Students who had once avoided eye contact now greeted her with respect. Teachers acknowledged her presence more consistently, recognizing the maturity and intelligence displayed in the recent incident. Even the hallways seemed different, charged with an awareness that dominance and fear could be challenged with wit, patience, and careful planning. The bullies, confronted with their own limitations, began a period of reflection. Marcus, in particular, struggled with the dissonance between his self-perception and reality. His attempts to reassert authority were met with skepticism and quiet resistance from peers. Jenna, once reliant on charm and conformity, realized that manipulation without genuine understanding of consequences could be easily dismantled. Liam, too, confronted the lessons of underestimation and arrogance. Their experiences became a quiet but lasting reminder of the repercussions of cruelty and hubris. Maya's influence extended beyond the immediate players. Students who had witnessed or heard of the incident began to reconsider their own responses to bullying and intimidation. The story of her calm, calculated triumph became a touchstone, a narrative illustrating that empowerment does not require aggression, that intelligence and foresight can shift even the most entrenched power dynamics. Discussions in classrooms, hallways, and online forums among students increasingly focused on strategy, resilience, and ethical empowerment. The incident also reshaped Maya's internal world. She had experienced isolation, fear, and relentless mockery, yet she had emerged with a sense of agency that transcended the immediate victory. Her confidence grew, rooted not in arrogance but in the deep understanding that careful observation, preparation, and courage could transform adversity into opportunity. She had not only defended herself but had done so in a way that reinforced her values, her intellect, and her sense of justice. Over time, the story of Classroom 14B became legendary within Jefferson High. Teachers recounted it as an example of psychological insight and strategic thinking. Students shared it as a tale of empowerment, a story that challenged assumptions about strength, vulnerability, and resilience. Maya, though she never sought fame, became an unspoken leader, a figure whose example inspired others to navigate challenges with intelligence, composure, and moral clarity. The bullies' trajectory, conversely, continued to be shaped by the incident. Their social standing, once rooted in fear and dominance, eroded gradually as peers became less tolerant of cruelty. Teachers monitored their behavior more closely, and interventions were introduced to guide them toward reflection and accountability. Their experiences underscored the broader lesson that power achieved through intimidation is fragile, and that those who wield it without understanding consequence risk inevitable exposure and humiliation. Maya, now navigating the halls with quiet assurance, reflected on the transformation of the space itself. The empty classroom, once a site of potential humiliation, had become a symbol of possibility, strategy, and resilience. Every desk, every shadow, every reflective surface had been part of a carefully orchestrated reversal. In mastering that space, she had mastered not only a specific challenge but also the broader narrative of her life within the school. As weeks passed, the cultural shift within Jefferson High became more pronounced. Students began to support one another in subtle but meaningful ways, recognizing that empowerment and respect were cultivated through observation, patience, and collaboration rather than fear and aggression. Maya's example became a quiet blueprint for navigating challenges, reinforcing the value of foresight, strategic thinking, and calm resolve in the face of adversity. The final impact of the incident was both immediate and long-lasting. Maya's classmates no longer viewed her as the quiet, overlooked student. Instead, she became a symbol of intelligence, courage, and strategic empowerment. The bully's behavior, stripped of the cloak of invincibility, served as a cautionary tale. The school culture, subtly but unmistakably, shifted toward accountability, respect, and recognition of the nuanced forms of power that extend beyond brute force. In the end, the empty classroom told a story that words alone could not capture. It was a testament to resilience, a reminder that strategic thinking could overcome arrogance and intimidation. Maya had transformed fear into opportunity, isolation into control, and potential humiliation into a triumph of intellect and composure. The narrative of that day would endure, whispered and recounted in the hallways for years to come, leaving a lasting impression on all who encountered it. Maya's triumph was not merely about overcoming bullies. It was about asserting agency, reclaiming space, and demonstrating that intelligence, preparation, and moral courage could create outcomes far beyond what brute force or intimidation could achieve. The incident redefined the social dynamics of Jefferson High, shifted perceptions, and left a legacy of empowerment that would continue to influence students, teachers, and the culture of the school long after the echoes of that day had faded. In the quiet aftermath, Maya stood at the center of the classroom one last time, taking in the space she had transformed. The sun's rays filtered through the windows, casting long, warm beams across the floor. She felt a calm satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing one has acted with precision, intelligence, and integrity. The bullies had been undone, the narrative reclaimed, and the lessons of courage, foresight, and strategic empowerment firmly established. The empty classroom, once a place of fear and isolation, had become a symbol of possibility, a testament to the power of patience, observation, and resilience. Maya walked away knowing that the story of what had transpired would endure, not as a tale of revenge, but as a demonstration of what could be achieved when one refused to be underestimated not by chance but by choice. And with that, Jefferson High had witnessed a transformation, not just of one student, but of the culture, the perception of power, and the understanding of what it truly meant to claim agency in the face of adversity. Maya's actions had reverberated far beyond the walls of Classroom 14B, leaving a legacy of intelligence, strategy, and empowerment that would inspire every student who walked the halls long after the echoes of that day had faded into memory.